his head.
There we go. All right. Good afternoon, Special Olympics Kansas, and welcome to Virtual Health and Fitness Community Involvement Thursday with Rebecca McMahon from K-State Research and Extension and Snap Ed. Today, we are going to be talking about vegetable garden maintenance. So many of you, actually, looking at this lobby here, almost all of you have a garden that you have planted, that you've either started or are going to start very soon. And hold on, I gotta let Kaylee in real fast. There we go. And so Tom Bueller started off this conversation a couple weeks ago talking about, how to get your garden prepped and ready for planting. And Rebecca is going to talk about what you should do today once your plants start sprouting. So I've seen a lot of really great pictures from you guys. Everyone's plants are really about that tall and about 2 leaves on the top of them. So that's pretty awesome. So we'll go ahead and do our athlete introductions today, starting with Rebecca Henderson, and then tell us your favorite childhood TV show, okay?
Okay. Hi, my name is Becca Henderson. My favorite cartoon when I was a kid, and this always will be Scooby-Doo and Looney Tunes.
Very good. Tyler.
Hi, my name is Tella Griswold. I am a health manager for Special Olympics Kansas. I want to say thanks for United Healthcare working for me and work for them. My favorite children cartoon I grown up is Looney Tunes because I love Bugs Bunny. He said I forgot to turn left to Albuquerque.
Very good. Gigi.
Nice one, Tyler.
Thanks, Luke.
I'll fight for that.
Hi, my name is Gigi, and my favorite childhood cartoon was Scooby-Doo.
Very good. Bo.
Mine is Bo Reno. I'm a half Messidor, and my cartoon is Scooby-Doo and Simpson.
Nice. Luke.
Hi, my name is Luke. I'm a health messenger, and I'm with the Special Olympics. My favorite childhood TV shows was the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Nice. Brandon.
He said, Ghibli.
Brandon, can you hear us? I know you're at Disney World right now.
How many times he going?
I know, right? He's there every day.
I know. Why he didn't take us?
Well,
Brandon, you're on mute. Can you hear us?
Yeah, Mickey and SpongeBob, yep.
There you go. Brandon, what's your favorite childhood cartoon? Your favorite childhood cartoon?
Yeah, I have it on mute. It's Mickey Mouse and SpongeBob. That's the 2 favorites I have.
Nice. Tony.
Yep.
Well, my name is Tony, and then my cartoon show is Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh, yes.
Nice.
I'll fight for that.
Kaylee.
Like Rugrats and Looney Tunes.
Very good. That's everyone. Am I missing anyone?
You, Jesse, what's your favorite cartoon as a kid?
My favorite was definitely Looney Tunes. I'm really glad a lot of people said that one because the Coyote and Roadrunner used to be my favorite. And then I also really like Daffy Duck. So those were my favorite cartoon characters. So awesome. Thank you so much, athletes, for sharing your favorite cartoon and introducing yourselves. I'm going to let Sue Sing in real quick. Tandy, I'll pass it over to you. Let you introduce Rebecca for us. And then Rebecca, go ahead and take over.
Sounds good. And welcome, everybody. I do want to just thank you for being here. My favorite childhood cartoon was Scooby-Doo. So I'm high-fiving all of you guys that like Scooby-Doo too. But welcome, and I will turn it over to Rebecca. She is a K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Extension Agent in Sedgwick County in the Wichita area. So Rebecca, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. And I will tell you all a secret. Most horticulture agents have this problem, but I definitely do as well, that once I start talking about plants, I tend to get a little excited and a little carried away. So when when you've had all that your brains can handle and we're out of time, just let me know and we'll be done for the day. So I'm gonna go ahead.
Rebecca,
and-
did we have the athletes? Do you know which athletes are from Wichita?
I don't think so, no.
Raise your hand if you're from Wichita. There we go. I know we had 2 of them. So
Okay.
Mr. Tyler and Miss Gigi are right next door to you.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So Jesse, can you make it so I can share my screen?
Oh, yep.
Rebecca,
Can't
you didn't
see.
tell us your favorite childhood TV show.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I mean, I watched an awful lot of Looney Tunes. That was one of the options that we had growing up. So in the middle of nowhere in northern Wisconsin. So that's probably what I'd have to go with as well. Okay.
Right, it's enabled.
Okay. So our topic today is caring for your vegetable garden. And there's, if this is probably not a shock to any of you, but there's more to talk about than we can fit in the time that's available. So we're going to cover as much as we can and really try to talk about some very practical tips that can help you be a little bit more successful. So we're going to talk a little bit about the weather and how that impacts your garden. You've maybe already noticed that in the last couple of weeks, but it's definitely going to be a thing as we move through the summer and into the fall. We're going to talk about watering and mulching your garden, using trellises or stakes in your garden. And then we're just going to do a tiny little bit about insect and disease diagnosis if we have time. We might not get to that today. We'll see. So we're going to start out by talking about the weather. And we know that the weather impacts us a lot, right? You know, it sometimes impacts our mood. It impacts how we feel. It impacts us physically, whether we're hot or cold. And our plants are exactly the same way. And so some plants like different weather conditions than others. And so in Kansas, we have a wide range of weather conditions, right? Last week it was really kind of hot, and this week we're back to cool and cloudy, at least where I am in the Wichita area. But we haven't gotten a whole lot of rain. And so all of these things are going to impact our plants. So in the springtime, we often have a period of time that the weather is cool. So it's maybe staying in the 60s, maybe even the 50s. Overnight temperatures are a little bit cooler. We hope they don't go down below freezing. Most of us in Kansas by mid-May, we're pretty safe on that front. And then you also can have springs where it gets really rainy. Other times, like for us, I'm kind of looking at it like there's rain in the forecast, but it keeps not raining. So I'm like, okay, is it going to be a dry year or a wet year? And so we really want to cultivate the habit of paying attention to the weather. If that's maybe something that you haven't done a whole lot, something that you might consider is if you've got a calendar that you use or a piece of paper or a paper calendar, you can make a note on your calendar as far as was today hot? Was it cold? Was it rainy? Was it cloudy? Was it really windy? We've had some really windy days this spring. So paying attention to what the weather is doing is going to help us understand what's happening with our plants and should we be worried, should we do something or not. So when we have cooler weather and in particular cool and rainy weather, this is a time when we have a greater risk of disease for our plants, especially for our summer plants like tomatoes and squash and peppers and things like that. So if it's going to be cool and rainy for a long period of time, we need to keep an eye on our plants and look for signs of diseases. The other thing that we need to keep in mind, especially here in Kansas, is that sometimes we can go from this weather, this cool and rainy weather, to this weather where it's summer and it's hot and dry in just a matter of days. And like this spring, it's kind of going back and forth between the two. And so when we have a period of the cool, rainy weather, and then all of a sudden we have hot, sunny, windy weather, our plants don't adapt very easily, just like we don't adapt very easily. You know, we have a hot day after several cool days and you're like, oh my gosh, it feels so hot, and it's actually only like 73 degrees. And so our plants are the exact same way. So when we have those weather changes, we want to keep a close eye on our plants, and we want to maybe make sure that they might need some extra water, especially for plants that are in containers. They might need some extra water when it turns a little bit hotter and drier. The other thing that happens sometimes when it gets hot and dry is some of our insects that bother our plants start to grow faster. They eat more food, which happen to be our plants. They reproduce faster and make more insects faster. And so we can start to see more problems with insects when it gets hotter. So as you get into the summer, you're going to want to keep an eye on your plants for any problems with insects.
Oh.
The other thing that can happen in Kansas, some years it's a dry year, other years we have lots of humidity. So I don't know if you can just look at this picture on the screen and feel like that hot, sticky air, you know, that it's just wet and it sticks to you and it's hard to breathe. So those humid conditions, when it's in the middle of the summer and it's hot and humid, that can also cause some disease problems for our plants. So if you look at this picture, you can see that there's plants in there that aren't looking too healthy. They're, you know, turning brown and, you know, losing some leaves, and some are dying. All of that is just weather conditions causing some disease problems. So the first thing that we need to do is to pay attention to our weather, so that we know to keep an eye on our plants and look for signs that there might be things that are wrong. The other thing that is important when we get, especially, like, I wonder how many of you have tomatoes planted? Do any of you have tomatoes planted? A couple of you? Yeah. So if you have tomatoes planted, one of the things that is important to know is that when it gets to the middle of the summer, and it is really hot, like during the day, it is over 90 degrees, and overnight, you know, we don't think about the nighttime temperature because we go to bed, right? But the plants are still out there in the overnight temperatures. And if our overnight temperatures are over 75 degrees, so like if we have a period of days in the middle of the summer when at night it's still 80 degrees or so, that actually makes it so that our tomato plants don't want to produce fruit. They don't want to set fruit when it's hot during the day and hot at night. And so sometimes if we're not paying attention to the weather, then later on, like about a month later, we're like, why isn't my plant producing anything? And it's just because about a month before, when it would have been flowering and setting that fruit, it was too hot. And so we want to pay attention to all of those things to the best of our ability and realize that they're going to impact our plants. Depending on your garden space, and you know, if you have plants in containers, sometimes you might, you know, Tom probably talked about wanting your garden in full sun. And that's absolutely the case. We want full sun. However, sometimes our plants don't mind a little bit of shade. So like if you've got a container and you can move it pretty easily, if it's not too heavy to move, or you can put it in a spot where it sometimes gets a little bit of shade in the afternoon, sometimes that'll help keep the plants a little bit cooler, and it's okay. Sometimes, you know, if you have a different garden space or a bigger space, you could consider a shade cloth or something like that. Sometimes I even grow lettuce underneath a trellis that I'm growing other plants on, so it gets a little shade from those plants. And then the last thing to keep in mind, you know, hopefully you have a great summer growing your vegetables, really productive, and you get to the point in the fall where your plants are still growing, But then it starts to get cooler. So the nights really start to cool off. Maybe it still gets into the 80s during the day, but overnight it might get down into the 50s or 60s. And so at that time of year, that is a great time. Sometimes that happens, in August, sometimes not until September. That is a great time to plant some more vegetables that like cold weather. So things like lettuce and spinach, radishes. But we also want to know that our plants that like warm weather, so things like tomatoes and peppers and squash and melons, they are going to slow way down at that point. They're not going to grow as fast. They're not going to ripen as fast. And so, we just know that things are going to change when the weather starts to get cool in the fall. Anyone have any questions about the weather? We could talk about the weather for the next 45 minutes with no problems.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if it gets really hot at night, maybe the plants won't grow very much, but when it gets hot outside, it can still dry up the dirt. But if it's still under the shade and the heat temperature, that might keep the ground of the garden cool, wet a little bit longer before the sun moves. So that's where the shadow and the shade moves. So it can dry up pretty quickly. If it continues getting hot like that, give it extra water and keep watering until all the grounds are wet, completely wet. If it's like 80 or 90, you gotta give it a lot of water drinks. And for what I could tell, seeing the other plants that's like cool down or something else like that, and also insects of it, that can happen like tomato worms or any insects that gets on the leaf, and might have to fertilize by spraying it to keep the insects away from it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So one of the things that is so important about paying attention to the weather and your plants and where they're planted is definitely going to have to do with the water. And so we're going to talk about the watering next and some things to look at. I see both Becca and Tyler have their hands raised. Becca, do you have a question?
Yes. If there's like any type of soil that would like help the vegetables during the summer, do you have any suggestions? Like if it's like hot or cold or rainy, or just.
Are you planting in containers or raised beds or in the ground? What are you doing?
We are planning to do, we have a garden like in our front area of our house. So we're probably doing that in containers.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're planting in the ground, usually things won't dry out quite as quickly. And so if you need to, adding, like when you plant, mixing in some compost into that soil is a really great way to help your plants for lots of different reasons, but it can help with the watering as well. If you're growing your plants in containers, we recommend the largest containers that you can afford and afford the soil for, because they do dry out so fast. And we'll talk about watering containers here in a minute. What I recommend for containers is you want to buy the best potting soil that you can afford and find in your location. And then if you can get a little bit of compost and mix a little bit of compost into that potting soil, that really helps. It helps with some fertilizer for those plants, and it also helps hold a little bit more water so they don't dry out quite as easily. So those are a couple of things. Compost isn't quite the answer to every problem, but it's an answer to an awful lot of problems.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Yep. Tyler?
Okay, like, what if it's hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit outside? Like if you have tomato plants or tomatoes ready to harvest, like if it's hot summer day, like it's over 100 degrees, how do I recover my plants as keep cool down? Like the sun can burn some leaves off the tomato plants.
Okay, so We absolutely do. You know as well as I do, here in Wichita, we get over 100 degrees, sometimes more days in the summer than we want it to. So the good news is for like your tomato plants, the plant itself doesn't really mind the hot. And by the time, hopefully, cross our fingers that we don't have any 100-degree days soon, hopefully by the time we have those days over 100, the plant is used to being outside in hot weather. So hopefully, as long as you're watering adequately and it's not too dry, the 100-degree temperatures aren't going to damage the leaves on your plant. Now, the fruit is another story because the fruit, like if it gets exposed to the direct sunlight in hot conditions, you can get sun scald, which is, a fancy way of saying sunburn on your tomato fruit, or on your peppers as well. You can get sun scald and things like that. So one of the things that I often encourage folks to do is, if you're able to, either in the early morning before it gets too hot, like that's a great time. Might seem kind of crazy, but if you go out to your garden after the sun is up and it's 6 or 6:30 and it's not terribly hot yet, like pick anything that is close to being ripe then and bring it inside so it is not outside when it's close to being ripe and in the full heat of the sun. And particularly with tomatoes, once they're showing some color on the fruit, you can pick them and ripen them on your counter, and they're going to taste just about the same as if you leave them out on the plant until they're fully ripe. So if it's looking like it's going to be really nasty and hot, don't be afraid to pick those tomatoes a little bit early. You want to be sure that they've got showing some good color first, but then pick them a little early so that they don't get damaged by hot and sun. Do you have another question?
Quick question.
Yes.
So how does this happen when the plants slow down by growing? Does it slow down growing by every night when it gets hot at night?
So that is really interesting. A lot of our plants that love summer heat, things like cucumbers and melons and squash and tomatoes and peppers, the plant themselves, the leaves will grow just fine, even when it's hot at night. They'll keep growing, but they don't often set very good fruit. They don't set fruit very well. So sometimes your plant is going to look perfectly healthy, but the fruit, the plant may not be as productive as what you might see.
Oh, so will it continue growing faster if I keep watering my plants?
Yeah, you definitely want to, even when it's really hot, you want to keep watering, because if you stop watering, then the plant's going to die in the heat.
So that changed the colors of the leaves, which means they're dying. But if it changed the color of leaves again by overfilling it, that means I give the plants too much water.
Yeah, so you are going to get lots and lots of practice at looking at your leaves and the color of the leaves. As long as they're green, that's a good sign. If they start getting pale green, that is a sign that they might need some more fertilizer, or maybe you're watering too much. If they start to get spots on them, that might be a disease. And if they start to turn brown, then that is when you're really concerned, because that's when they're probably dying for whatever reason.
Okay, fertilizer is for the plants to eat, right?
Yes, fertilizer is the plant's food. Gigi, do you have a question?
Yes. Do certain animals like certain do certain animals like certain vegetables and fruits to go through? Like, do squirrels like tomatoes or something like that? And like, how do you keep them from being out of your garden?
Yeah, so animals are a real problem with a lot of gardens. So when you have like lettuces or carrots or radishes, leafy greens or root vegetables, rabbits love those. And so a lot of times what I do, if I'm not growing in a container, like if I'm in the ground or even a short raised bed, rabbits will jump over things.
Yeah.
I will actually get chicken wire, and I will make fences or cages around my garden area to keep the rabbits out of those plants. Rabbits don't like tomato and pepper plants as much. But where you run into problems, particularly with tomatoes, is you can sometimes have birds or squirrels that will come and take bites or peck the fruit. And usually they're looking for water. Often it's in the summer when they're thirsty, and they'll start to go after your tomato fruit.
Okay.
So, again, it kind of depends. Sometimes getting them up off the ground can help. Sometimes cages or fencing can help. Sometimes, if you give the squirrels and birds something else to eat and drink somewhere else, that can help.
Okay.
And sometimes it doesn't, because it just collects more animals to your garden. So you kind of have to try and see what happens for you. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about watering. So watering is one of those things I find it really hard to teach you on a computer screen. Sometimes you just have to do it and practice. And the best thing to do with your watering is to just water and then observe what happens. So one of the things that we want to be careful about is that we want to water where the roots are. So the part of your plants that are absorbing the water is the roots. I had to teach my husband this, and I teach my kids this. The leaves aren't the part that's drinking the water. It's the roots. So when you're watering, it doesn't matter if you get water. You don't want to get water up on the leaves. In fact, that can cause diseases sometimes. You want to be sure that you're putting your watering can or your hose, whatever you're using to water, you want it to be at the soil level. And you want to put it near the plants themselves. So if you planted a tomato in your garden, you don't water the soil 6 feet away from the tomato, you water the soil right around the tomato. So we want to make sure that we're watering where the plant roots are. So that is tip number one with your watering. Now, if you've planted in a container, by the time your plant has started to grow, you're going to assume that there's roots through the whole container. So you want to make sure that you water all of the soil in the container. And we'll talk in a couple slides here about how to know that you've done that. But if you've got your vegetables planted in a garden area, you want to not water the leaves, you water the soil where the roots are, and you want to stick pretty close to the plants. This is a little bit tricky. It is tricky for everyone. I don't think I've ever met anyone who this is just makes a ton of sense to right away. But when we water, we want to do what's called watering deeply and infrequently. So sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes in Kansas, you do have to water every day, especially those of you using containers to grow your vegetables. Containers dry out so much. Sometimes you may even have to water in the morning and then again at night. You may need to water twice if you've got containers. However, if you're growing in a garden or even a raised bed, if it'll work, you don't want to water every day. You want to water maybe every other day or maybe every third day. And you don't want to just water the top. You don't want to take your hose or your watering can, or if you're using drip irrigation, you don't want to just sprinkle the top. You want that to water enough so that it soaks into the soil and is moist down 12 or maybe even 15 inches deep. So one of the things that you can do the next time that you go out and water is water how much you think you should and let the water, then stop, let the water soak in, maybe go water another area and come back. And then take your fingers and stick your finger in and see how deep did the water go? Is it just the top ½ inch of soil that is wet? Well, that means that you probably need to water more. Is it the top inch or 2 inch? Well, that's better, but that's still not enough. So you want, when you check with your finger, you want, as deep as your finger will go, you want it to be moist. You don't want it to be muddy. Yeah, we don't want to be making mud pies in our garden, but we want it to be moist. So maybe you have a screwdriver or a stick or, a trowel, a shovel that you can dig a little bit. You don't want to disturb your plants, but dig down a little bit and see how deep the water goes in the soil, how moist is the soil and how deep. So you don't have to do that every single time you water, but you might do that a couple times just so you get a sense of how much do I need to water. When I had to teach my husband to garden too, and so when he was watering our garden plot, a lot of times I would say, stand with the hose by the tomato plant and count to 15 or 20 relatively slowly, and then go to the next plant, and kind of figure out how long should I stand there and water each plant. And then the other thing you'll notice, you're going to get really good at observing things in your garden, is, maybe you have a heavier clay soil and it takes a long time for the water to soak in. So you want to wait until the water soaks all the way in before you check it. Or maybe you have a really sandy soil and it soaks in really fast. And so, those are just things to kind of pay attention to when you're watering. But the key is we want to get the water nice and deep so that all of the plant roots get water. And then if we can do it, we want to wait 1 or 2 or 3 days before we water again. So that because we're trying to train our plant roots, kind of like you're training your muscles, you're training your plant roots to have good plant root muscles and grow deep in the soil, rather than, if they know the only place they're going to get food and water is in the top inch of the soil, then they're not going to grow their roots deep. So that's what we're doing when we want to water deeply, and try not to water every day if we can do it. So this is just a picture that kind of shows what happens if we just water a little bit, every day. Our plant roots are going to be a lot shorter. So you can kind of see those shorter roots versus if we water a little bit more, not so much, again, that we have mud pies, but a little bit more, and maybe every other day or every 3 days when it's cooler, our plant roots are going to grow nice and deep and strong. And when we have deep, strong roots, that means that they're going to tolerate hot, dry weather that we often get in Kansas in the summer a little bit better. So I know some of you have containers. And so some of our tips when we're watering containers is the first one is, if you haven't already planted, you want to get the largest container that you can afford and that you can find to use for your plants, because it gets so hot in Kansas and things dry out, and the larger container, the better off you're going to be. And then we talked about adding some compost to your soil. There's also a product called Soil Moist. And you have to be a little careful using it because a little bit goes a long way. But if you mix that into your soil really well, it helps it hold water a little bit better, so you don't have to water quite as much. During the summer, if you have containers, we mentioned this, you may need to water your containers every single day. And sometimes you may need to water in the morning and again in the evening. Just to make sure that they are in good condition, or, depending on what your schedule is like, if you water in the morning and again, like maybe at lunchtime or in the early afternoon, that might not be a bad time to check your containers as well. And then the other key with watering our containers is we want to make sure that the entire container gets the water it needs, so not just the top. And when we choose our containers, we want to choose a container that's got holes on the bottom, right? So that the water can drain out. We don't want it to be a pond in a container. And so if our container has the holes in the bottom that it should have, When we water, we, sometimes you don't fill your container all the way to the top. Maybe there's an inch or so between the soil and the top of the pot. What I like to do is I like to fill the pot with water so that it's level with the top, and then let it soak in. And then I watch and I see, is water draining out the bottom of that pot? And if there's water draining out the bottom of the pot, then I know that the soil all the way through my container got moist from the water. If I water all the way to the top and I let it soak in and there's no water coming out of the bottom of the pot, that tells me that it all got soaked up in the soil and I should put more water into that container. So then I water again and wait and see if water comes out the bottom of the pot. So sometimes that can be a little tricky, if you're using a hose or a watering can, you get water on the deck or on the sidewalk or wherever. So you have to be a little careful when you're watering, but you want to wait and see if that water drains out the bottom. So you can also check with your finger, get down into the pot and see if the soil is moist deeper than just the top little bit. But the key I always look for is if the water is draining out the bottom. Okay, so I'm guessing that many of you are probably going to be hand watering, at least to get started, either using a hose or a watering can. There are some other things that you can do for watering your plants. We call it irrigation. And some of these, depending on the size of your garden, may be something you want to think about. Sometimes we use what's called flood or furrow irrigation. So like if you've got a garden area, you could maybe put a trench next to your plants and fill that with water. That's called furrow irrigation. And then you just fill that up, flood it up with water and let it soak in. There's also overhead or sprinkler irrigation. We see that a lot, like with folks watering their lawns or flowers or things like that. And it can be a good choice for a vegetable garden, especially if you have like lettuce or carrots or small things like that. It's not as good for tomatoes and peppers and vine crops, partly because the plants get so big that the plants trap the water and it can't get to the roots, and partly because the plants can get diseases on them if we're not really careful. So you can use sprinkler irrigation, but you need to pay attention and see if it's actually working the way you want it to for those larger crops. And then the other option is called drip
Excuse me for a second.
Yep, do you have a question?
Well, I had to go because my little sister has a soccer game, so.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for coming.
Okay. You're welcome. Bye.
Yep.
Bye, Luke.
Okay. So the last type is called drip irrigation, sometimes trickle irrigation. It's not quite the same as using a soaker hose, although you may find soaker hoses are easier to find than a really good drip irrigation type of system. So a soaker hose can work in a pinch. But the nice thing about drip and trickle irrigation is that you put water through essentially, these tubing, this tube, and it puts the water, it drips out of the tube right into the soil where the plants are. And so one of the nice things in Kansas about using a soaker hose or drip irrigation is that it keeps the water from getting lost in the air, in the wind or in the heat for evaporation. So it goes right into the soil. So we save water when we use that. And the other thing that is kind of nice is if we have a soaker hose or a drip irrigation system, we can actually connect a timer to it. You can get a relatively cheap timer at some of the box stores, home improvement stores, and you connect it to your hose and to your soaker hose or your drip line and set the timer to run for a certain amount of time, and you can go and do something else and it'll turn it off for you when the time is up. So it takes a little bit of practice to determine the right amount of time to set. But if you someday, either this year or another year, have a larger garden, you may want to consider investing in drip irrigation of some sort and a timer to help you with your watering. So just some different pictures. There's all kinds of different ways to do timers and clocks. Sometimes I just set a timer on my phone so I remember to go and turn the water off. You know, can use a kitchen timer. There's all kinds of really crazy fancy timers that scare me a little bit to use sometimes. Or what I like, this kind of yellow and black one, we use this one in our demonstration garden a lot. It's just a cheap $10 or $15 timer that we got at a home improvement store, and it connects to the hose, and you just turn the timer to the number of minutes you want to run the water, and then it turns it off for you. So I really like that one because it's simple and easy to use. So some of you may have a garden that has sandier soil. Do any of you know that you maybe have sandier soil? You know, it feels or looks a little more like sand. Don't see any hands. Okay, well, just in case, I'll talk a little bit about this. So your sandy soil, you can water it. You can put a lot of water onto it really fast because it soaks in really fast. And then, so that's a good thing, but sandy soil dries out really fast, you know, and it doesn't hold water very much. You know, think about a beach. You know, if you put water on a beach sand, the sand dries out. Same thing in a garden. You put water on a sandy soil in your garden and it's going to dry out faster. So when it gets hot and dry, a sandy garden soil is going to need a lot more water. So loam soil is kind of in the middle, you know, so that is soil that it's not really sandy and it's not sticky like clay. It's just kind of in the middle. Do any of you maybe have soil that's like this in the middle? But a lot of you are either in containers or have clay soil. So we'll get to that. So your loam soil, you can water fairly fast and it holds water pretty well. So when it gets hot in the summer, you're probably going to need to water your loamy soil 2 to 3 times per week. And if you have, you know, again, if you're in a garden and if you have a clay soil, a lot of us in Kansas have heavier clay soils. So one of the tricks with clay soil, it can be a real challenge for even an experienced gardener. And so the challenge with clay soil is that the water does not soak in very fast. It can only, you know, so if you think about an inch of water, a clay soil can only absorb about 1/4 inch of water in 1 hour. And so that is super, super duper slow. And so you have to put the water on really slowly and carefully. So sometimes, like if you're hand watering, that means you water your plants and you go and water everything else and then come back and start over at the beginning so that it has time to soak in and get the water it needs. Clay soils can get this crust on the top of them, which is hard to deal with sometimes, and the water won't soak in. So we like to use mulches on top of our soil to prevent that crusting. The good thing about your clay soil is that it holds water really well. And so you might only need to water 1 or 2 times a week if you do it really carefully and slowly. If you don't water slowly, then you're probably going to need to water 2 to 3 times a week. So the tricky thing with that clay soil is how slow the water soaks in. So our last trick with watering is a good practice no matter what, and that is to use mulch with your plants. Particularly those of you that have an in-ground garden, mulch is going to be really helpful and really important. For most of us in Kansas, one of the easiest and cheapest things to get to mulch with is straw. There's lots and lots of wheat straw. So in this picture, that's what you can see that we are mulching with in our garden is straw. And I like to put 3 to 6 inches of straw around the plants. Usually I'm going to put the mulch down sometime in late May to the first part of June, just when it starts to get a little bit hotter. You may also have, you know, if you're in an area where there's lots of tree leaves, you can chop up tree leaves Sometimes I like to use a lawnmower, to mow up the leaves, and then that gets them all chopped up, and then I put the leaves down as a mulch as well. You can use black plastic. There's good and bad things about that. Black plastic makes the soil hotter, but it also keeps the weeds down really well. Same thing with landscape fabric. And the bad thing about the plastic and the landscape fabric is it's not going to decompose. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, but it's not going to decompose, whereas the straw and the leaves are going to break down and get mixed into your soil and provide nutrients for your plants over time. And maybe newspaper is an option that works for you. You can chop up or shred up newspaper and use that as a mulch. The challenge sometimes with the newspaper is that when it gets wet, it gets gluey and sticks together, and then the water doesn't go through it very well. So there's good and bad things about all of these different kinds of mulches. I think for most beginning gardeners, I really encourage either straw or leaves as a good mulch to go around your plants. And the nice thing about the mulch is that it also helps hold the water in. So it keeps your soil cooler, it keeps it more evenly moist, so you maybe don't have to water as often. And it also helps keep your plants healthy so they don't get disease quite as easily. Okay, any questions about watering? No. How are we doing? Are our brains full? Getting there? You have a question, Bo?
Yeah. Sometimes on my garden, I do the hose, the sprinkling. I put it in the middle, I put it in the side and get all it, and I go back inside and look at my time on my phone. Up, it's time for to turn it off. I do that in the morning, and I before I go to work, and I sometimes I do in the morning, and sometimes I do water my plant night too.
Yeah. So if you're going to use the sprinkler like that, the best time to do that is absolutely in the morning. If things get really dry and you feel like you have to do it at night, you can do that. But it's better to do it in the morning if you can. That way the leaves have time to dry out. Otherwise, you can sometimes get some diseases. Okay. So I know our brains are almost full. I want to talk a little bit about using some trellises or stakes to help grow our plants vertically, help them grow up, and also maybe give us a little more space in our gardens. So we're going to talk about some different options and look at some pictures here. And so sometimes we want to grow things that need a trellis. So this picture are pole beans. So they're a variety of beans that they can grow 6 feet tall. And so we want to put them on a trellis or a stake of some sort. Also like cucumbers, you can just let cucumbers grow on the ground, but they can also grow on a trellis and take up a little bit less space, get a little less out of control sometimes. If you don't have a whole lot of space, so this is a little community garden plot that I had a number of years ago, and it was about 10 by 10 feet, so not very big. And you can see this metal trellis. I got a 16-foot long cattle panel from a farm store and cut it in half and made this trellis that looks, it's called an A-frame trellis. It looks like a capital A. And then I planted my cucumbers along the bottom of the trellis, and they would just grow all the way up to the top. And then the cucumbers would hang down both on the inside and the outside of the trellis. So instead of my entire garden being covered by cucumber plants, I could use that trellis to fit more plants into my garden space.
Let me see, where do you buy that at, that type of one for the cucumber? Because I'm in New Jersey, but I know it's out.
So here, I got it at like Tractor Supply. So you'll have to kind of see what types of, those sorts of stores can be the same or different across the country. So, it might be something like Tractor Supply, it might be something like Farm and Fleet, or, I don't know. I don't know what stores you might have in New Jersey. But those
What
are
about
the
like
two.
Lowe's and Home Depot, Rebecca? What about like
Um,
Lowe's and Home Depot and like places like that?
You could look at Lowe's and Home Depot. This particular one is more of a cattle kennel, which is going to be more of a farm store type option. But I think you could find, things like chicken wire or other types of wire mesh materials at Lowe's and Home Depot. So you may just kind of have to see what's available at the stores you can find. So another reason that I really like to use cages or trellises is it helps get the plants up off the ground. So like our tomatoes and cucumbers, when they're flopping onto the ground and touching the soil, they can end up getting a lot more disease problems. And so cages and stakes and trellises can be really helpful for that. And also, like if you like to grow cucumbers, I like to grow cucumbers. And if you just have your cucumbers on the ground, you can sometimes end up with a crazy guy like this one who's all curled up and kind of looks like a snake rather than nice and straight. So you can have better quality fruit if you use a trellis or a cage or a stake. So cages are probably the easiest to use. And the trick is, again, just like everything else, the biggest that you can find and afford, the better off you're going to be. If you're growing your vegetables in a container, you obviously want to look for a cage that's going to fit into your container to make sure that that's going to work for you. And so like these cages, a lot of the cages that we use, we actually got concrete reinforcing wire, from a home improvement store, and just bent it into a circle and clipped it. So that's one way to kind of make your own cage, or you can find cages at a lot of garden centers and home improvement stores. So usually you put the cage on and just kind of let the plant grow from there, and the cage just supports the plant in growing more upright. So tomatoes can be caged, sometimes peppers. The cages can help keep the pepper plants from breaking in the wind or things like that. And if you've got a larger cage, you can also let your cucumbers or beans or peas grow on those cages as well. Yes, Becca.
How about like spices like cilantro and other spices?
Yeah, if you've got herbs or spices that are going to be a little bit taller or vining, you could use a short cage to kind of support them as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. For some of you that are maybe using containers instead of a cage, maybe a stake might be a better choice. I've done this sometimes as well. I have a tomato plant in a cage and I get a big stake, 6 or sometimes even 8 feet tall. And I stick that stake into the middle of the pot, all the way to the bottom so it doesn't get too top heavy. And then I will just tie the tomato plant as it grows to that stake all the way up. And sometimes I'll clip off some of the side shoots so that the plant just doesn't go everywhere. So if you're growing in a container, like with your tomatoes or cucumbers, that might be something that you want to do as well. There's another process. This is a little trickier, but something you could consider. And I like to use this in my garden because then I don't have big cages that I have to store somewhere and figure out what to do with in the off season. Is I put metal, or you can use wood too. I put big stakes every couple of plants, and then I use twine or string to kind of wrap back and forth around the plants and the stakes, and kind of tie the plants up that way. So that one takes a little more practice to figure out the way to do it so that it works for you, but then you don't have to deal with a cage. So there's good and bad things about that as well. If you're going to grow beans or cucumbers, you may want some other types of trellises. This is a picture from a community garden here in Wichita, where they make these teepee trellises that have 3 or 4 main supports. And then you can see that they got some wire, one side it's more the larger wire, on another side they've got some chicken wire that they put between those supports for the plants to grow on. You could also do arbors. Nothing says that it has to be a boring trellis. You could do an arbor of some sort for your cucumbers or your pole beans or things like that as well. And then another option would be just a vertical trellis. This might be easier to find the materials. They've got some metal rebar stakes that they put in, and then some metal or twine panels kind of in between them that they tied to the stakes, and then the plants grow up those panels. So that's just another look at the same kind of thing. They put some metal stakes, and in this one they use some twine or string to make a trellis that then their beans are going to grow on. So lots of opportunities to be creative and maybe use what you have available to you readily. This is another picture from a community garden. So they have, they put some PVC posts in, they have some wood posts, and then you can see they actually found some tree branches to build the rest of the trellis. So they've got some different bamboo poles and some tree branches and things like that to support the trellis. We did look at the cattle panel a little bit. It's just another picture of what that looks like. Okay, so I think we are just about out of time. Does anyone have any questions on the trellises or things like that? Or any other questions? Bo, I see you have your hand up.
What stuff you can put on your plants? You got bugs, you have to eat your plants. What stuff is easy to put on them?
Yeah, so like if you have insects, there are certain things, certain insecticides that are safe to use on vegetables. And so the important part is if you go to a garden center or a box store that has a garden section and you're looking at, there's all these things available. And so you want to be sure that it says that it is safe for use on vegetable plants. That's number one. I'll jump to my next slide here about general pest control while we're talking about the insects. And then you want to read the instructions on the bottle so that you're sure that you're applying them the way that they're supposed to be applied. Because you don't want to take the bottle and just dump the whole thing on the plant because that's not how it's supposed to be used. And sometimes it'll say like that you need to wait a certain number of days after using the insecticide before you can harvest. So you want to read those instructions really carefully and make sure that you're following them. And then the other part about treating insects or diseases with any sort of pesticide is you want to make sure that you're treating the right thing because not all insecticides are going to kill all insects. Not all fungicides are going to control all the diseases. So one of the most important steps with insects or diseases on your vegetables is really looking close at your plants. And once you're pretty confident that you've got a problem, figuring out what kind of insect is it, what kind of disease is it, and that's where your local extension office can really help you out. Our office here, I'm going to jump ahead here a couple slides. We could have a whole nother session on disease and insects for sure. So here, in our county, in most counties, even in other places, other states, have some sort of service where they'll answer gardening questions. So here in Sedgwick County, and we don't ask where you're from. You can call or email us even if you're not from Sedgwick County. But we're going to have best information for those of you in Kansas for sure. You can email our hotline with pictures or questions. You can see that on the screen. You can call our hotline and talk to someone on the phone and get questions answered if you're not sure what's going on. And we can take pictures that are texted as well. So if you're seeing an insect or a problem on your plant, you can take pictures, send them to us, and we can help you figure out what's going on and what you should do next. Yes, Tyler.
Okay, like, I got a cherry tree in my backyard. Like, birds love cherries, right?
Yes.
I got a fake owl. Like, every time when my dad tell me to move the fake owl somewhere, try to scare the birds away. Like, how do I try get the birds out of the way, like stay away from cherry tree? I tried to move the fake owl like somewhere, like different location, tried to scare it.
Yeah, birds are really smarter than we want them to be about things like that. So the fake owl or other fake wildlife is going to work for a short period of time, but it's not going to work for maybe the whole season. And so depending on the size of your cherry tree, you might see, like if your tree is still smaller, you could try getting bird netting and putting bird netting over the tree, and like sometimes tying silver, shiny ribbons or something on it a little bit to kind of keep the birds off of it and scare them like that. So sometimes you have to do 2 or 3 different things all at the same time to keep the birds away from your fruit for sure. That's easier said than done.
Like, it's hard to keep the bird. Last year, we don't have cherries last year. All the birds eat it. This year, our cherries is growing right now. Like, I say, I need to get something to the birds stay away. We got some fruit, strawberry and cherry. Our apple is growing. Last year, we got a lot of apples last year. And I see a squirrel try to, in his mouth, I saw our apple. Squirrels took one of my apple and run away and go back in the bigger tree and said, I need to do something to get the wild animals staying away my fruit tree, cherries, all my foods.
Yeah. Sometimes we just have to share a little bit, especially with our fruit, but it can definitely get frustrating. So yeah, usually you need a combination of different things to keep them away.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, then I think we are done.
All right. Sounds like we're concluding. So athletes, you guys know what to do on the count of 3.
1, 2, 3.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank you.
You're
Awesome.
welcome.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. We're going to go ahead and log off now. Thanks to you guys for such a great week of virtual health and fitness. I hope you guys have a great weekend. As always, Rebecca, can you send the PowerPoints from today so that I can send those out to athletes for the ones who didn't make it today? I'm sure they're going to watch the recording. Some of them
Definitely.
didn't make it today, unfortunately. So athletes, I'll get the resources out to you guys. Episodes to me, and then we'll see you guys on virtual health and fitness on Monday next week. Sounds good?
Sounds good. Thank you, Jesse.
You're welcome. Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.